last is the idea that through this understanding of art as being impactful on its own, and there's so much missing here, is that I think artists need to develop their own discourse, codified discourse methods that take place in the same intellectual spaces as other disciplines. And I think people could argue this, but I don't think that's happening right now. I think that the discourse around art is really done through the language of other disciplines, and that takes a lot of power away from artists. It's either done through other disciplines, it's done before it becomes public. So I think probably the most interesting discourse around art by artists is done in critique settings, conversations between artists in classrooms. But once we get it out into, when we start having panel discussions and shit, everybody just starts talking about philosophy and theory and art history and history, and also letting some expert in that kind of discipline lead or structure the conversation. That's a lot of the time what it is. Not to mention the writing about art is not done by artists for the most part. So it either happens before becoming public, or it's just not done at all. Or unfortunately, sometimes I see, this is the worst thing, I think, that artists, if they don't want to talk about theory and philosophy and art history and whatever other discipline they like, anthropology, sociology, economics, whatever, if they don't want to put on that hat, which a lot of us don't anymore because we've been convinced that it's pretentious to do that, then we just have really low-level conversations about what we're doing. We almost kind of coolly shrug off what it is that we've done. We won't talk about it because we don't want to sound like we're being pretentious, and that is really bad. Then maybe it's the first step in trying to generate our own language, but it's not good because it still allows everybody else to have the voice, and not us. We'll shrug it off coolly and refuse to talk. There's a lot of jokiness, which I really appreciate. It's really fucking funny, but joking about, annoying, pretentious sounding talk about art. Or the other thing that we do is we just talk about it. It becomes about artist cliques and power dynamics within small artist cliques. So when artists are talking about art, we're not talking about the art. We're talking about who was at what and who's doing what with who, and shit like that. And it's not really very interesting to me. So anyway, these aren't fully fledged out points, but the whole idea behind this last part is by starting with my favorite discipline, philosophy, and the language that really good philosophy has used to describe art, use that language initially to describe this observation that I've made about the art making, to the art studying, to the art viewing. When I say studying, I don't mean thinking about art after it's been made. I mean the study that happens in a classroom, as art has been made. So my observation about that whole environment, with philosophy applied to it, and it's specifically really now a philosophy of object-oriented ontology, actor network theory, and Nietzsche and Kant. I should say maybe get rid of Kant, because object-oriented ontology and actor network theory kind of helped me to just like build on Kant and like everybody else who was important enough to where I don't need to mention them. So basically it's like using object-oriented ontology, actor network theory, and Nietzsche initially to describe what happens in this environment that ranges from the artist making work to the classroom to the public art viewing environment. And by doing that, eventually to generate a language that is for artists, a way of discoursing that's just artist generated, not that comes from our experience of what we do, not from another discipline. And this brings me to my last shady point that I want to make, which is that there was a person when I was in grad school who I was writing about this very topic, and I was trying to figure out how to write about it, and I was using art history at the time and philosophy to try to talk about, and another artist from the past to try to talk about, Philip Guston, to try to talk about this experience that I was having in my own art making experience, physically in my studio. And so I had what I'm describing, I'd had this whole experience, and I was trying to describe this experience. So I was going out to all these sources: philosophy, art history, other artists' experience, Philip Guston's experience in the studio, which I find fascinating because he had this very personal, private studio practice, yet his work addressed social issues during a time that a lot of work was leaving the studio to address social issues. So anyway, I was looking to all these other sources to try to validate the experience, to try to find examples, other instances of what I was experiencing in my studio with this, this relational, powerful, feedback looping system of generating artworks, and then how that works out in public once those things have been made. And this person who was critiquing my writing and quote unquote helping me write, he was consistently not very nice to me and kind of dismissive of what I was doing. And one thing that he said to me with a condescending sneer was that I'm doing something that is like irrational. I'm just coming up with an idea, and then I'm going and trying to find things that support the idea instead of the more rational way, which is whatever. Maybe he didn't call it rational, but to him it was the right way, that I was doing it the wrong way. And the right way would be to go look at all the evidence. So read all the philosophy, read all the art history, and blah, 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 blah. Just be totally immersed in this world of thought. And then once I find a pattern among all of that, to then generate a theory. But what I just realized, and that always seemed like, I was like, dang, am I just fucking dumb? That was actually my thought. I'm like, oh, I'm not a scientist. That was it. That's so funny because that's kind of like what he's saying. And the whole point of this, and what I realized a few days ago, is that what I was doing was artistic. My thinking was artistic. I didn't need all the reading and writing and like thousands of years of history of philosophy and art history to make a point for me, because I can actually make it within myself, within my own studio practice, because I have fucking eyes. I'm good at observing my environment with my body, my mind, my soul, my intellect. And I can say in a very rational way that what I experience in my studio is what I experience in my studio, and I can make points just based off that environment alone. And it actually makes perfect sense for me to say, well, this is what's happening in my space. Let's see if that's happening in anybody else's space. And that, I would say, is an artist's way of thinking as opposed to a philosopher's way of thinking, or an art historian's way of thinking or a theorist's way of thinking. That for the artist, like my experience of making can be the primary source of real information that I don't have to, go and find like, what do you call it? Like, oh my God, I'm so blanking out because I'm so tired of this thing with artists needing to research, but I don't need to like research my own experience to find out if it's valid. So I think that is like the beginning of what could be like an artist thought based and language based system for talking about work that's rigorous and challenging. Like it's not just like, just in here and just like feeling it out today, it's like much more serious than that. It's an intellectual thing to do. It's an intellectual discipline like others. But it's not relying on other disciplines. It doesn't need to. It could maybe, like be like, yeah, that's where I see that happening. That's exactly what I do. I'm like, okay, I have this experience in my studio. And then I read something about object-oriented ontology and I'm like, yep, I see that going on. Anyway, that's the idea. Is to make a language and a system for artists that doesn't rely on other disciplines for discourse and that doesn't just like, exit discourse because we don't have a good way of being empowered at a high level to talk about our work.